Starting event. All right, I believe we're live here, everybody. We're going to wait a few minutes and see if our other presenters can join us. I'm Brian Parks. Give ourselves a few minutes here. All right, everyone, just another couple minutes here. We've got some technical difficulties going on. The webinar will not be on how to run a webinar on time, thankfully. So we're going to wait here a couple minutes and see if our other presenters are able to log on. Thanks for your patience. Hey, Brandon, looks like you've joined. If you can enable your audio and video up top.
Come on.
Great. So we'll wait on Mark, and then we can kick off.
Okay.
Never as easy as it should be.
Yeah. I've never used Webinar Jam.
Hopefully anyone who gets the recording of this will know to skip through the first 5-6 minutes. Maybe we can just jump in, Brandon, as Mark joins, he can introduce himself, and then we can kick off. Does that work for you? All right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Sorry for the technical difficulties again. I'm Brian Parks with Bigfoot Capital. Today, we're joined by Brandon Shelton here with TFX Capital, as well as Mark Murphy with, I don't know how to say it, actually, Brandon. Is it ATL software or Addle? Addle software. Today we'll be talking about building an A+ early stage team. Thankful to have both Brandon and Mark here who have a bunch of experience both on the operational and investing side, both of whom happen to be Army veterans, where I believe they'll be able to share a lot of their experience as veterans in terms of building teams, communication frameworks, and execution plans that really work at the early stage. So Brandon, if you want to do a quick intro of yourself, and then Mark can do the same, we'll jump into the content.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's funny that this thing is in super high def. So I'm looking at how old I look in this. I need to go to like low def. This question was my background, and I can introduce TFX. I grew up in rural Virginia. I went to University of Richmond undergrad. I used the Army ROTC platform to pay for college. So I owed 8 years post-graduation in the military service. I served 6 years active as an infantry officer and as an intelligence officer overseas and in the United States. I met my wife on active duty. She was another officer who did ROTC. We left active duty in 2004. I did 2 more years in the Army Reserves. From 2004 to 8, I tried to transition myself into capital markets, fixed income sales and trading, and started and finished a global MBA from Duke University along the way. I was actually a fixed income trader at Bear Stearns in 2008, March 2008, when we exploded and went out of business. I stayed on transition team. I then networked off of there and recreated myself in a startup consulting firm started by some British special operations leaders that were teaching businesses and C-suites how to plan and execute using some military disciplines. And so I did that for 4 years. It was a startup. We had enabling tech and traveled every week from 2008 to 12. That allowed my wife and I to move out of the New York City area, move down south, where we moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, for quality of life, family stuff. In 2012, my largest client, a multi-generational high net worth family in Chicago, ended up hiring me to come in and set up their first ever strategy and development and growth apparatus. And from 2012 to 2015, we did some great stuff, and brought in a bunch of technologies, built some, expanded the geographical footprint of the business. I'd say kind of moved the business into the 21st century on the technology front. And then in 2015, I started TFX Capital. And for the last 4+ years, we've been trying to get out of our own way and learn how venture capital operates. I can tell you, being here in the Southeast, there aren't a ton of venture capital firms here or people who know how it operates, as Mark can attest to there in Charleston, which is just a couple hours away from me. But yeah, our investment thesis at TFX Capital is to be an early stage investor, a venture capital investor, focus on B2B software and tech-enabled businesses. And that's sort of pre-Series A, Series A entry points. We're looking for multi-founder teams that have domain expertise in their marketplaces. So they've just worked in that marketplace, so to speak. And we're really looking for, and our mandate is built around, make sure that one of those founders, maybe, and hopefully just one, started their professional career in the military. And there's some certain tenets I can talk to later, but Mark and I both know it. It really puts a premium at age 18, 20, 22, 25 years old on leadership and people management. And we believe the vast majority of problems that most business leaders in any business, nonprofit, community church, doesn't matter, that people are facing today, yes, are technology fueled and information overloaded, underpaid, overworked, all that stuff, but it's people. It's getting a group of people to get big things done in a small period of time. And so that's the common denominator I draw across my background, because otherwise it looks like I skipped around and constantly searching for a job. And I think I was at moments. But we want to make sure that that person has been specifically trained in the military under high intensity environments, how to lead small teams in a 24/7 environment to do big things. And then we want that person to go do other things post-military, commercially, academically, and others, and then unite then the entirety of their experience the fact that they're in the founding team is an X factor. So when the team is starting to blink and starting to wear down and starting to challenge, why do we do this? This stinks. This is awful, blah, 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 years 3, 4, and 5. Our early evidence has proven true. The former military leader kind of stands strong and acts as that rock, saying, no, let's make sure we're making high quality decisions. Let's think through the problem. Let's stay persistent. Let's stay creative, stay entrepreneurial. And so that's our investment thesis. We want to deliver above market returns with this type of high performing athlete. And there's all kinds of side benefits, which I think Mark's better skilled at talking to, but the type of former military leader, and it's a certain rifle shot that we're looking for, we think in the business setting, is uniquely skilled at bringing a team together, overhauling a business, putting a premium in the organization on talent where maybe it was on the tech or the customer, right? Like how do you really with limited resources as a 10-person, 20-person, 50-person company act like culture matters, right? People matters when you're in this 24/7, I've got 1 month of money in the bank sort of environment. And so that's what we're doing today. And in totality of the last 21 years since I graduated college, it's just been also a ton of mistakes. I am now making mistakes at almost an hourly rate. I'm trying to avoid terminal mistakes. But I'm not an expert. I'm not the best, but our firm has a ton of people like Mark and like others around us that are bigger, better, smarter, faster. And my job is to get all of them to look inward at moments to help our founders out, right? Let me match make, let me organize, let me follow up. Let's see if we can get the right minds in the room against the right problem at the right time. And that's a perfect use of my personal skill set at the moment. But in those experiences, again, my common denominator for the purposes of this call is I think the vast majority of everything that frustrates us on a daily basis are people. Right. And so I have a keen interest and I'm on leadership. I'm not the best leader and I've had many moments of being a terrible leader. But I have also been around extraordinary leaders in the military and commercially, and conversely, horrendous leaders commercially and in the military. So that's my frame of reference. That's me, and that's TFX Capital.
Great. Thanks, Brandon. Very helpful and a lot to probably dig into as we go through this next 30 minutes or so. Mark, thanks for joining. Oh, we don't have you on audio, Mark. Up top. Yeah. Let's see. Can we?
How are we doing now?
There you go. We got you.
New platform. Thank you. So let me be. I'll be brief so we can get to the content, but appreciate the opportunity here. Mark Murphy, currently CEO of Atlatl Software. As Brandon said, started post college. I went to Bucknell University and ROTC grad from Bucknell. Spent some time in the military. Was a engineer officer, combat engineer. Left the service as a captain, and transitioned into a big consulting firm, Deloitte Consulting, which I think Deloitte and firms like that are really great first stops for military veterans because it does offer a lot of structure and career paths I think are very fitting for first job for a veteran. So just kind of want to share that as a perspective. And then as I went through the ranks there, became a technology partner at Deloitte, and really got a bug to do something a little different, and did something people thought was a little bit crazy, and left Deloitte partnership and joined a startup. Joined at about 70 people. I ended up becoming CEO of the startup. Ran that up to about 350 people. We're a health benefits software company. And ended up, going through a, due diligence, a pitch process, and exited the company fairly successfully back in 2015 to Booz Allen Hamilton. And outstanding experience in that kind of hyper growth over a course of just a short period of time, 3.5 years. So learned a lot of that kind of extreme scaling on building teams and executing a culture over scale. And then through really the power of great networking, got the opportunity to come over to Atlatl and be CEO of another startup and try to test the repeatability of some of the things I learned. So we're a vertical software platform servicing mostly B2B companies in the industrial manufacturing tech. And we have a very unique virtual and augmented reality commerce platform. And experiencing all the elements of building startup teams again here. We're about 45 people and growing rapidly. So Brian, let me hand it off to you, and then kind of an effort to get to the real content, but happy to answer any questions as well.
Yeah, great, guys. I'm back. I'm not sitting in the dark anymore. As I was looking at myself, it was looking like I was about to take a nap, but that's not the case. This is selfishly a way for me to learn from you guys in terms of this content. So I've just quick once over on me, kind of been involved in the early stage in software for the past 10 years. Prior to that was a middle market investment banker, but I've worked on pretty small teams all along, and I've only built small teams, and it's all been early stage stuff. So, we'll focus on the early stage here, but it could be relevant to pair that, Mark, with some of your later stage experience going from 70 to 300, currently being at 45, which, frankly for me is larger than any team I've ever been involved with as well. So I'm super early stage guy, I guess. But maybe we can just jump right in. Thanks for all the background. We've got a handful of questions. They may bleed together, but the first one is, what makes a great early stage leadership team? And how do you go about assembling that team? And possibly before you jump in, when is the right time to do so? When do you need to put, is it day one, day negative 180, that you need to assemble some sort of leadership, or does it kind of come together as you go?
No, and I've talked to Brandon and I've had this very discussion. I think it's day one. I mean, I think it could be small, it could be two of you, but there's fundamental things that I believe you need to start really early. Things like figuring out what your core values are, figuring out why you're all there, and part of that is starting to build a leadership team behind you as early as possible. And that will take on obviously a bunch of elements. Is everyone's doing multiple jobs, so you should find someone, early stages, whether it be your head engineer or someone in operations and accounting, which I think is critical to an early stage team, being on your leadership team, and start establishing even at the very early stages who that core leadership team is. For a number of reasons, the company needs to be led more than one person. You as CEO or the leader are going to need people you can lean on. And going back and trying to establish that from a bunch of heads down doers becomes a lot harder than establishing it right out of the gate. I think as you look at hiring, the key one, two, the first couple of people need to look for people that are able and willing to really get into multiple facets of the role. And I think as I look at really lessons, and I'm learning them over again here, is everyone really needs to understand that you're at a startup. And I've found this more as we've grown, we've exited people, we've rehired people. That's fundamental. People that you hire early on, they need to understand that they're at a startup and what that entails. And we can get into why I've learned that if people are interested. But if you have the fundamentals that this is going to be hard, this is a startup, we're all going to be doing a lot more roles than just coming to work and leaving. You have to get that right, or people are going to have mixed expectations about how hard it's going to be. And it's really hard. And I think if there's not those expectations set from your leadership all the way down, you're not going to get the right throughput early on. That's absolutely critical of a team.
Brandon, do you have anything to tack on to that?
There we go. Unmuted myself. Listen, we're just a couple years into what we're doing. I guess the two comments to add to what Mark's saying is, so from our vantage point, we're founder focused and we're investing in these certain leaders who are taught how to lead, and we're trying to assess that in the discovery process and deal flow sequence. I think, but a couple of things I've noticed that, so I'm not going to answer your question, I'm going to just make some comments, is that generally we're dealing with type A, very ambitious, driven folks. And that's generally why they serve in the military. They have some life story where they are overcoming adversity. They experience adversity in the military. So if you're dealing with this type of person we're talking about, they are not your normal 30-year-old. And so they are purpose-driven. They're very sometimes difficult to communicate with because they're stubborn, but that's the very thing that we want, right? And they're generally trying to solve nasty problems. So what I have noticed personally, just in the last couple of years of doing this, is that we only invest in multi-founder teams for the very point Mark said, right? So let's say it's 2 or 3 folks and we're not the first money in. So we're trying to encounter folks when they get to that year mark. And what we're finding is that the 2 or 3 folks, they're in their 30s or 40s or maybe 50s, with this maybe one or two of these former military driven folks in the founding team. They've done everything in their power and used their networks and whatever it is to get, they went all in. They didn't baby step in, the people we're talking to. We don't invest in the hammers looking for nails or the people that are trying to mentally solve a problem because it's cool and sexy and vain. We want people that are going to get dirty and going to fight, right? And so the heart and mind operate as one, and that's how we define mission driven. And so with those type of people, they get to that year mark and they've got some early learnings, right? They built something, ran a couple of experiments on the software front. They may, I don't want to use all the jargon of traction and MP, viable those are great terms, but I'm just talking about like the essence of a leader. They get to that about the year mark, 12-month mark, 15-month mark. They know they need more capital to stay alive because they don't have a workable product to generate meaningful revenue. And they're willing to sacrifice, right? They're willing to pay themselves nothing, right? Eat through savings, sleep on floors. They're willing, that's the type of people we're talking about here, right? But they have to tell a story in terms of what they're going to do. And so they face the problem that Mark and I talk about all the time is, okay, scale, right? Like, so how do I go from 3 people to 6 people, right? And in their mind, I only have a limited money. I'm going really fast. And if I'm still excited at the 15, 18-month mark, right? It's still, but what I don't realize is that I'm fatiguing. I'm actually breaking down, right? So my sleep patterns are off. My diet patterns are off. My stress levels are high. But most strong people, 18, 24 months, whatever the science says. And so what we're trying to do is say, okay, how is their ability to pick employees 3, 4, 5, 6? Who are those employees? And I have been surprised at the resistance that some founders that we deal with have, saying, I'm a startup. They either go one or two directions, right? I want a really senior, expensive guy or gal to be a CRO, CTO, right? They're looking to bring expertise in, which is a good sign. Or mostly they don't want to do that. They want to do fractional people, junior people, and they generally only want to hire talent that's in the path of least resistance. It's the thing closest, right? Because I'm so busy and I'm doing all the tasks, right? And our view is, and what we're trying to learn is that employees 3, 4, 5, all the way to 10 could kill you, right? And so we're starting to now start to measure how much turnover do you have? And a lot of these founders, purpose driven, they get to 2-year mark, they're like, they weren't a good fit, they didn't do this. And we ask them, did you onboard them? Did they have a role profile? And they short circuit it, even though they've worked commercially. They just short circuit some of these known easy process. And so they don't give themselves the ability to act as leaders. They're being doers because that's what got them to start the business and convince their spouses and their friends to do it. And that's what got them to year 1 or year 2. But at some point, you actually need to shake the startup-esque stuff that you read and go to the meetups and all that stuff. You actually need to become a business, especially if you start taking outside capital. So this is where we stress with our executive coaches and our mentors like Mark is saying, listen, no offense to all the books you're reading and the blogs you're reading and all your investor commentary, but at the end of the day, you 5 people, you 7 people will tell you, will decide if a year from now you're 15 people, fundamentally, right? And so make the time, and then Mark has some great stories of what he did at Spark that was very unique. His time pressure, the demands on his time at Spark were ridiculous. But like I went and visited him a couple of years ago when he was still in the seat, and he walked me around the building and he was telling me how he invested time. We tell our founders, day 1, the moment you go from founders to start hiring people, whether they be fractional people or full-time people, You need to onboard them. They need a role profile. We need a meeting cadence. We need to keep people informed. We're building a culture. And they're like, well, we're a startup and this person had to let go because we ran out of money and that's okay. But like your goal should be to have a stable group of folks that have very little turnover, right? And you're picking athletes. You get them to act as owners. So on the front end, they understand their partner plan, their freedom in the framework, where they're going to be held accountable, their left and right limits, why the business was started, what we're trying to achieve. And if you can put that up front, which is what big companies do, and we all hated it when we were in there, like, ugh, induction, onboarding is like, ugh, this is so stupid. There's a role for it, and obviously an adaptive manner, because that first 10 people, I'm just realizing, they can have a huge impact. Not your market, not your investors, it's the people. Solving the problem, adapting the problem, talking to the customers, working as a unit, right? How do you get small groups of people to do big, big things, right? And so that's just, I don't have any data on that. That's all anecdotal, it's all opinion. But just early stage guys, before they get to like Mark's level of 30 companies, 30 employees, 50 employees, I'm noticing that roughly this 10 person mark seems to be this inflect, like 5 to 10. And so what we try to tell, and by the way, most founders, they also don't realize that the thing doesn't J curve like they read about. We all pray, yay, as an investor, please sell yourself in a year for $1 billion. I love it. Most guys and gals go for 5, 6, 7 years in this perpetual grind. Bodies are breaking down, fatiguing. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that we've noticed as well, coming from corporate into what we're doing now and having a military background, is that the feedback loops are really bad.
Yeah.
And I hated performance management in the big companies because I always compared it to the military. When I was in the military, I hated it. I was like, this is like the person rating me or grading me. I always had this brash, immature, that's who I am. I'm just weird like that, right? And I'm not a very good follower. But you take a startup, and I'm a startup too. There are days where I'm like, I actually could use some feedback. So I actually have had to resurrect feedback channels just for myself. So how do you know if you're on the 5-year death march as a startup? Like, how in the world do you know you're achieving any level of success, right? And it's not through funding rounds. The smart founders we deal with, just because you got a funding round, it means it's an indicator, but it's not like the definition of success, right? And so, at the board, every founder hates having a board. Well, I'm sorry. To raise capital, you got to become a C Corp. C Corp, federal law, got to have 4 board meetings. I'm sorry. Well, if you're going to have a board meeting, why not ask them for feedback? How am I doing? Right? We actually fund 360 leadership development and other types of things for our founders. And they were like, normally they fight us. Like, I'm very busy. We're 6 people or 7 people. That's for bigger companies. I'm like, no, like this is for you now. I'm trying to prepare you the last 5 years to give you guys the oxygen to solve the problem, right? And so these feedback loops we've noticed as well, because they're severed in startup land, I think also impact how they go from that, 3 founders, a couple fractional people, 5 people, maybe 10 people, maybe they get to 15. And I just think Mark's exactly right. I mean, we're more now than we are more driven now to encourage our founders to focus on people, recruiting top flight talent, putting in some of these processes on people, onboarding, 90-day checklists, performance management, feedback, all hands calls, getting people bought in to act like an owner. Do that up front. Because I think when we started this 4+ years ago, I kind of had the same assumption, like, we'll just wait till they're 15, 20, 30 people. And they have, because I always define it as having a couple layers, right? I've got the exec team, I've got my VPs, I've got I think it relates really early on in the curve. So hopefully it's something in there helped to answer your question, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot there. I think my next question would be, okay, possibly on that last point, right? You see, exec team, VPs, call them folks sitting in seats doing roles. I've got a lot of stuff I'll just throw at you here. There's a notion of, hey, we need to invest and put all this time and effort up front day one to build these systems, whether they be feedback loops, role profiles, onboarding process. That takes a lot of work. Like, I can even emphasize with that running Bigfoot Capital, which started with me and now is only 3, could be 5, 6, 7 next year. But we're all busy with all sorts of stuff. Potentially prioritizing that when you don't come out of the background, be it corporate or a military structure where you don't have a lot of direct experience with that. Is there a way, one, to hack that? Because I think the danger there is waiting to do that and not building the muscle and into your DNA. say day one, and waiting till day 720 really puts you behind the 8 ball. The counter side of that coin is that not just pre-scaling? Do I really need to worry about that stuff? So how do you advise folks, or maybe Mark, in your own experience at Lattle, building from scratch again, I imagine, with no team? How have you managed that? Is it the CEO that has to do that? Is there someone who maybe brings that experience in the team and is super passionate about it that can lead that function?
Hey, Mark, tell them, so we had Mark get on real quick. Mark should answer this, but Mark, tell them, remember when we brought you on a couple years ago because we were getting resistance from some of our TFX founders? We made you do a webinar, I think maybe 2 years ago, and you talked about the diligence experience at Spark and what they asked to look at in the data room.
Yeah, so reflecting on that, is if you have a goal, and everyone, I mean, we're in this for a reason, right? There should be a goal in mind of building a big business or building a business. Is the pain we experienced going through due diligence of processes we didn't have in place because, to your guys' point, we thought we were a startup and we could focus on the business, focus on building great software, focus on our customers, and the things we didn't have in place when we got to due diligence. And not because we weren't running a great business, we were, but we didn't think we needed certain processes. And in the clear light of day of due diligence, which due diligence at a level of Fortune 500 acquirer is intrusive, and to be not even being dramatic, it's painful. So what I learned in coming into this new job, I said we are going to start as early as possible. And not over processing things, but starting to pragmatically build processes to make sure when we had the opportunity for value creation, those elements were in place. Building a good fundamental balance sheet and P&L statement. And it's not going to be fully populated, but just those kind of disciplines. Capturing your IP, documenting your software processes, having a clear and auditable comp plan for your people as you grow it is so much easier to build tiny steps along that process than to try to go back and redo it at 300, 350 people. One thing we're doing now, even at 45, is making sure we have compensation levels and bands. So, when we hire an engineer, we understand if they're a step 1, step 2, and step 3, and that's our process. You can create your own. And if you're step 2, you can generally, we're going to hire you within this salary band. And that becomes super important when you're hiring real talent, so you can sit them down and explain to them where they sit. And it becomes a great thing to show your board that you're thinking out compensation scaling. And get it started at 10 people and just incrementally add to it. But it's things like that you start thinking about early. Not only lead to building a good business one block at a time, but it's things I show Series A investors, and it's things I'm hoping to show M&A investors at some point. But it reflects on running a good business and starting to think about those things early. IP is one that I worry about and focus on a lot. And again, it seems early for a company like us to think about protecting IP, but it's one that reflects really well to investors. You start building moats early around what kind of technology you're developing. So that's something to think about early. This notion of onboarding is something we were just passionate about at Spark. And we realized that if we were going to, at one point, 1 year we hired 100 people in 1 year, and you're bringing in that volume of talent, is people can get lost. And now we've replicated it here, with an onboarding process that we're super proud of, and that was grassroots. I had a customer success person that had a background in teaching, completely unrelated to the job she was doing here, but she was great at pulling together, a day one curriculum for everyone. And if you miss week one of a person onboarding, it's hard to recover. I'll tell you, you can get someone on a great path or a poor path in days 1 through 5. So everyone should leave day 5. If they start on Monday, they should walk out on Friday. And what we're trying to do is
Uh-oh, looks like we just lost Mark.
Am I back?
You're back.
Because if you walk out on Friday, you should know what your job is, what the company mission is, the company core values, how your job, and this is really important, how your job every day contributes to what we're trying to do as a company. And you should have met all your leadership, not just your direct line of sight, but the people that are leading the company. And I really feel like if you can get people day 1 through 5 really invested in the company in that short period of time through a really structured, well presented, well thought out onboarding process, even down to small things like, do they get a company t-shirt and a water bottle on day 1? Does someone take them out to lunch on day 3? Do they meet me at some point? And then, do you shake their hand on the way out the door on Friday night? We've found that seems like a small thing. It's hugely impactful to setting people on a trajectory for success. And I've seen the other side of it. When we were in hyperscale, is people get lost in that first week. They end up getting to their role and are still lost, and you never recover that guy. And turnover at 45 people is tremendously costly. The cost of someone walking out the door, for whatever reason, is a huge impact at 45 people. It's a huge impact at 10 people, and you can't afford to get those wrong. But I'll counter that with one more statement, and then I'll pause. Is if you get one wrong, you got to have the courage to address it. And that, I believe, that held true. That holds true for me now. It was part of our hiring disciplines at Spark. Is if we got one wrong, we had to have the courage to deal with it quickly. And obviously respectfully, and there's ways to do that respectfully to the people, but you got to correct it quick, because that pain does not age well. It doesn't at 45. If you're 3,000 or 10,000, we've seen the results. People can hang around for a long time, but you got to be able to make those hard decisions.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Hey, Brendan, real quick, can I just hey, so in case you have some early stage founders on this, I'm not advocating for taking unnecessary corporate processes for companies 1 or 2 years old, but I'll tell you, it's a very big difference for us when we deal with folks in their 40s and 50s versus 20s and 30s. People who have more managerial experience in the commercial sector, I'm not saying they're better, but they tend to pick and choose the right things, right? So they put some thought against their lawyer because they've seen things go pear-shaped in the commercial setting with the bad lawyer. They understand there's a huge liability not only for picking the right people, you could be sued in a heartbeat, and it could bring your entire startup down, right? I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why there's certain processes where a role profile is a great example. If you cannot write down in 1 hour with your earbuds in your co-working space in WeWork, you can't just write 5 bullet points of what that person will do. You probably don't need the person. It acts as a filtering, governing mechanism. Okay, how do you know you're paying people correctly, right? When you start getting institutional investors, they're going to ask for your financial model. They're going to ask for, okay, you got 8 people on the payroll. Some of these salaries look way out of whack. How'd you pick the salary? I just made it up. Okay, you're not conveying to an investor that you're a good steward of our money. Not to say you're not smart and you're not driven and you don't know the problem, but you need to understand you understand liability, people, and financial rigor. So there's certain proven controls and processes out there that you can very lightly bring in at the earliest moment. The other thing I would just say is no different than turning over to a 40-person company. Go be 2 founders and hire 3 people, and you can only afford 3 people after a very painful capital raise process, and have all 3 of those people not function the way you desired. You're equally as responsible for that. Right? You know what I'm saying? So again, if I had to work that hard and I can only add 2 bodies to my full-time team, I would make damn sure that I pick correctly. They understand what we're trying to do. They kind of think on their own and they're problem solvers. They can take some rocks out of my pack and put them in theirs and then unleash them. My job as a leader, even in the early stage, this is not Fortune 50 stuff. A leader at every portion's job is to hold you back, not to push you forward. So how do you get them bought in? If you hire a lot of the folks I hear all the time, my founders, well, I hired this person from a large enterprise and they were unprepared to work in the startup environment. Okay, what did you do to filter that out? Oh, I just hired them. Okay, gave them a big title because they were a director at a Fortune 50 company and you made them like an EVP here. That's what I'm trying to say. You gave them some equity. Okay, they were too young, and I reacted to their energy in the first 3 weeks of doing consulting for. Again, it's your responsibility, and I find a lot of leaders that we deal with, they would rather build their business and solve the problem, and so they get frustrated when there's people, process stuff, and they get frustrated dealing with investors. These are 2 very important processes that if you choose to build a high growth startup in software land, you have to build time and bandwidth into doing it, right? But that people bit, for the purposes of this call, how awesome would it be if you can only afford 10 people over 3 years, that the same 10 people have stayed? I have to believe it will de-risk your opportunities for future growth. I'm not saying your lifestyle business or zombie company, but if you're sitting there like, hey, yeah, we went all the way up to 14, we brought it back down to 2, and then we hired 3 people, and then she left, and then he left, and it wasn't a fit. You just have this high turnover. So the only sticking factor in the business for the investors are the founders. That's okay. But at some point, demonstrate that you can attract top flight talent and keep them, right? And inspire them and push them and unleash them and let them accomplish more than they ever could in the environment, right? Right. Yeah. So I do think at all stages, this is really important. Again, this is a new learning. 4 years ago, I would have said, same like most people, like, let's wait till they get a little bit more structure of people. I don't want to be the corporate guy offering too much process. 40 plus years of learning, I'm telling you right now, it needs to start right out of the gate. Right out of the gate. I'll shut up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Brandon. Brandon, earlier you mentioned a few things. Having an X factor on the team or a rock, someone that who's going to be there, I mean, through this mud and the muck of startup world who can galvanize the troops, so to speak. And that kind of leads me into leadership is a very broad term, right? Genuine leadership. You can't force people to be a leader. How can you grow someone into leadership or help them harness who they are to act as an effective leader? I don't know what you guys have seen there or you've experienced in your own careers in terms of growing up as leaders.
I'll be 60 seconds. Mark and I went through structured learning environments in an early age. Mark, I don't know if you ever went through like executive coaching or leadership development stuff in the corporate space, but there's probably been opportunities, right? Business school degrees, MBA, that type of stuff. But I think for startup land folks, where again, you're dealing with 5-man teams or 5-person, 10-person, 20-person, 50-person teams. I think it is you need to filter as the founder or CEO, you need to build filtering mechanisms because when it's going to be run contrary to your pressure is time. We got to go. We'll take some risk. If the person doesn't work out, we'll make a quick decision. We'll look for a backfill. I think it's the opposite. Saying, okay, well, I want this person, right? I do my role profile. Maybe I have enough money to hire someone to go, headhunt the person or whatever. And they go, well, I ask now our founders like, oh, well, this person we just hired from there. I'm like, okay, how many people did they just manage? Not 15 years ago, but how many people? Because that's what we're talking about here. Do they know how to manage people informally or formally? Have they ever been taught to do that? Right? Maybe it's on the job and that's no problem. But if you're taking someone who's an individual contributor out of another company and you bring them over to this psychotic, crazy 24/7 horse race, and you're going to say, hey, get all this done. You better make sure you're filtering up front the way you interview and you phone screen and who I'm saying, like use your board, use your advisors, use your friends, use your confidants, your co-founders. But we should be filtering not for the sexiness of, hey, I just hired someone from Goldman Sachs and I slap it onto my investor deck and like, hey, I can hire top talent. You should care less about that. You should say, I want to know who this person is. Are they an expert in what they are today? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Okay, what are they going to be able to focus on strengths-wise inside the organization? But don't just assume that they understand how to manage a task, a project, or people. Look for evidence of that. I think, unfortunately, until you get to some level of a small business or even a large business where you can put in some internal leadership development elements, I defer to Mark on that. You do not have the time to take someone and say, let me teach you how to coach and mentor a person. Let me teach you how to manage a project management 101. We don't have time to create a Six Sigma program for you to understand, finding efficiencies, right? Like you need to filter for people who have demonstrated that formally or informally at some point prior to your company. And then your job is no different than a coach on a football field. I need to take that athlete and put them in this environment. And I need to flood them with as much resource and information via onboarding, transparency, culture, so that they have every opportunity to unlock every inch of space in their operating area, right? But you can't just sit there and go, well, what happened with this person? He just didn't work out. Why? He's from corporate. He's from a big corporate. He's too slow. Doesn't work. Okay, but did you interview for that? Was that something that you were surprised for? Right? You know what I'm saying? So I think that's what I would say is I do not think if you are in the first kind of 3 years of, equity capital infused high failure rate software startup land, I do not think you have the time or bandwidth or resources to teach someone how to manage people or manage projects. So you need to make sure in your filtering, you look for people who have demonstrated recent success and hopefully repeatable success in doing that.
Yeah. So does that fall under the, let's use a aphorism, hire slow, fire fast then? You're talking, Mark kind of mentioned the fire fast. That was more of the hire slow right there.
I think, slow, I would replace with maybe hire deliberately, hire with a lot of discipline, and we, at several times across two companies, we've talked about being very deliberate in our hires. And even before we start the hiring process, we're diversity. We needed to hire diversity. We wanted diversity in our engineering ranks. So we sat down and said, how do we be deliberate about that? So I think being deliberate about hiring. And then, and I've been fortunate to hire people that I've worked with before. But one thing that's worked is you have people that want to step up. And I try to ask them a clear question. Do you feel empowered in your role to lead these people? And have I given you, everything? Do you have a clear mission to be empowered to lead these people? Because often there's a bunch of people that want to do more, but for some reason they don't feel empowered in your organization. And it could be as little as asking that question and telling them they're empowered to lead. And I've seen huge results from that. Empower them, take down any barriers, and giving them the ability to lead. And I've had great results. Now, to Brandon's point, they got to have the fundamentals, but you'd be surprised. A lot of people come with the fundamentals, and as soon as they're empowered, they execute.
Great.
And, not unlike military, when you get to a certain point, you get empowered, and then it's up to you to execute.
Guys, we've got a little bit under 10 minutes left, so if you have anything that you're, super passionate about putting forth here, by all means do it. But, a couple of questions I have, very general questions. What do great teams do that good or okay teams do not do from your experience? If there's any tangible things you can point to. And when I say do, it's what results do they produce? What do you notice them doing in a regular capacity that good or okay teams, not bad teams, don't quite get done? A tack onto that is, how do you measure a great team? Is there any real metrics driven output there, or is it all, hey, this feels good, more qualitative and anecdotal?
So one thing I'm looking at right now that I'm really passionate about personally is the ability to challenge and commit. And I think great teams challenge each other, have healthy, very healthy sometimes dialogue on challenging issues, and then they're able to commit 100%. And when I see that work, our team is at its best. When you challenge or argue and miss the commit, I think that separates teams. And I've seen that a lot lately. And it's something I'm starting to look more for in my team to really measure their high performance is, can we challenge each other, then commit?
That's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mark. Brandon, anything to add there from your experience? You've worked with a bunch of teams. No? All right.
Is the best.
Okay, great. We've got a few more minutes here. This has been really, really, really helpful. I don't know if I have any salient questions beyond what we've covered, because I feel like we've covered a good amount. So we could just go ahead, Mark. You got something to add?
It's really fundamental. I should have brought it up before, but I think it's worth mentioning. Get an employee handbook written at one employee. And someone's going to thank me for this advice someday, but you will save yourselves a lot of problems, issues, potentially lawsuits, if you get an employee handbook written and constantly revisit it. The people challenge is the biggest part of this job, and that's a small, it seems very mundane, but it's an important comment.
Got it. And in your employee handbook, just to be clear here, kind of great stuff that you include in your handbook.
Just like, when to come to work, what our core hours are, what our days off are, how do you get your family benefits, our core values written down so everyone can reference it. Just general policies about behavior. It's amazing how over the course, again, of two businesses, how the simple act of getting that right or spending some time and getting that right becomes a benefit to the employees. It's an expectation setter. It's a confidence builder. It's sometimes a legal backup to things. But, as a CEO, that is a super helpful document that I think a lot of people dismiss because it's not overly sexy or overly fun. There's a lot of resources out there for people to get that done. But it'll save you some problems, and it'll really help your business if you can get that right.
Great. Kind of the closing here is maybe a closeout, 30, 60 seconds from each of you guys, or you can totally defer if you feel like you've already done that. My takeaways here are, this has been extremely helpful. You need to prioritize and invest in this. And when I say this, it is building the team communication and employee framework day one for your company, right? Let's treat our employees like we treat our customers. Let's treat it like we treat our product, right? Let's not undervalue the absolute most important component of our business, which we tend to do. Maybe you don't view it as directly driving a metric. Maybe it doesn't directly grow revenue. Maybe it's, not knocking up stuff on your product roadmap. But and I think that's potentially why it gets overlooked.
Yep. Don't underestimate how many times you need to tell someone what's important in your business. Continue to repeat it, and that's really helpful in keeping everyone focused on one direction.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Brian, again, the vast majority, I'll back up a step. If anyone has ever sat in an angel group meeting or done a one-on-one pitch to a high net worth person, angel investor, or talked to a small early stage venture fund like mine, almost all of the early assessment is on who is on the team. Mm-hmm. It's not the founders. Founders are really important, but like, who are they? Who is this person? And you look up their bio and you're like, this person has 2 years of commercial experience and they're the COO. You're like, okay, why did you make that decision? That may be the perfect decision for your business, but if you can't articulate it, how are you hiring? How are you attracting talent? I mean, that's, to me, how can you attract investors to put their money against something that's going to probably have a high failure rate, right? Signal number one. Signal number two, can you attract more talent that's more talented and more capable than you to give up their well-paying jobs as parents, right? And in the prime earning years of their life to come join this, right? And work for nothing and work harder than they've ever done in a regular process environment, right? Okay, that's proof point number two. And then you mentioned customers. Can you get customers who have plenty of options for choices and their door gets knocked on nonstop by armies and armies of, software salespeople? This is what we're evaluating. And so I find the founders do a lot of work because they have to try to please investors, right? A lot of them don't like dealing with us, and I get it. They do a lot of work trying to land a customer or two or three because they need some evidence that the thing is working. But at the middle of it, the foundation is, who is your team? And your team can be, by the way, your full-time team. It could also be, who are you bringing in on a fractional basis? Like, you were smart enough to say, I need a fractional CFO in my business. I didn't need an investor to tell me that. I'm just doing that because I'm a good steward of other people's capital, right? Like, I'm going to do that for myself. It's a good business decision. I have an employee handbook, so I used a fractional HR consulting firm, and there's 1 million of them in every single town in the United States for a very little amount of money. And like at 2 hours of your work, you can have one up and running, right? I mean, these are demand signals. Like, wow, these founders, I may not agree with your tech. I may not agree with some of the decisions you're making, but when it comes to parting with our money, you are demonstrating some early traction in terms of attracting talent and breaking through those barriers. So I know a lot of founders will say they're focused on talent and culture and values and stuff like that, but I just wanted to reinforce what Mark's saying, even at the early stages.
Great, guys. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks so much, Brandon, Mark. Very much appreciate it. Everyone who joined, thanks for joining us today. Here's to employee success. Everyone have a good one.
Thanks, guys.
Yes.
Thanks. Bye.